In my first official games review, we're going to be taking a look at an indie horror title created by a gentleman called Jeff Winner, horror story Hallowseed. As I'll be doing with all future review videos, this will be broken down and scored within 5 separate categories: story, graphics, soundtrack, general gameplay, and replayability value. Each one will be rated on a scale of 0 to 10 with a final mark out of 100%. With this game in particular, I had previously played the early access version a little while ago, and more recently I jumped into the full version. My views and opinions on this will be mostly from my time with the latter, but of course there are some atmospheric elements that I had during the early version which had altered a little because I had experienced them previously, so in particular with that I'll be referring to my first play. I'm going to do my absolute best to keep this spoiler free for you guys, so most of the footage will be from early on in the game. With that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Now let's take a look at horror story Hallowseed. So I began this story on a blank screen and was introduced to 3 teenagers, Michael, Anna and Jay, who are sitting around a campfire telling ghost stories to try and scare one another about the city they live in, Hallowseed. Suddenly, things took a turn for the worse. Michael seemed to have been possessed by some sort of demonic presence. At first glance, I thought this was the 2 guys playing a prank on the girl, until I heard Anna scream a horrific cry for help. Next thing, as Michael, I was awoken in an old abandoned mineshaft, with no recollection of how I ended up there. This is where my gaming experience began. The mineshaft was fairly easy to navigate out of once I found myself a box of matches, which, by the way, I kept lighting by mistake using the right mouse click, a lesson I learned from pretty quickly. Upon exit, I was met with a beautifully designed dark grey and eerie forest, the likes of which would creep anyone out. It was at this point I was able to use the game's sprint feature, which I couldn't previously in the shaft. As I made my way through the multiple pathway choices I had, I was beginning to feel a little lost, but I soon realised that there isn't really a wrong turn. They all seem to navigate you where you need to go, so don't let this dissuade you. Although, at the same time, it still gives you a feeling of being lost in the woods. I kept thinking I was seeing things move in the tree lines, but I couldn't decide whether there was something really there or it was my own imagination playing tricks on me, something which the game seems to do very well. This is aided by suitable sound effects which keep you on edge. The regular sounds of the forest came into play, but with the game's atmosphere, by this time already having me gripped with nervousness, seemed exaggerated in my mind, and I felt like I was jumping at shadows. At several points throughout my journey, I could hear flies buzzing, as if they were surrounding a corpse that I could not see. This added to my anxiety. I was getting a real Blair Witch vibe. Not before long, I found the campsite where I was at with my friends. It was deserted. Curiously enough, the fire was still active, Jay's guitar was still there, and our car lights were still on, giving me a realisation that I hadn't been missing for too long. It was in the car that I managed to find my phone, which I could now use the torch feature to navigate. Now in search of my friends, I continued in the woods. I felt a little better now I had a more reliable light source, but the fear was still there. One thing I was thankful for was that the phone didn't have a battery level. When games do things like that, to me, it just adds an unnecessary challenge. Although, I still wondered, because I had my phone, why exactly would I need a box of matches? After a little while, and a jump scare or 2, I found myself in a yard of an old abandoned house. I want to keep this as spoiler free as I can, so I'm just going to state that there were indications that my friends were inside. Gathering the equipment I needed to pick a lock to open the front door, I managed to obtain access. It was dark, creepy, and brought a very terrifying atmosphere with it. The door slammed and locked itself behind. I was now trapped. That's as far as I want to go with the story, as this was maybe just the first 10 minutes, and I want you guys to experience this for yourselves. Although, I will tell a little about my experiences within the house. I had the feeling I was being watched the entire time. Doors would open and close on their own. You can hear but not see a creepy group of people singing. A rocking chair would move on its own. Bloody handprints can be seen in several areas, and you feel claustrophobic the entire time. I felt a little lost at times, but soon figured out that when you complete a certain objective or grab a particular item, such as a key or a jotted note, you can then progress to the next part. Whether there are different orders you can complete these in, I'm not sure, but I think it may be possible. I would find myself looking behind me at all times and peering around corners very slowly. I was genuinely terrified. The house itself was not ridiculously oversized, which was very fitting. I can't really say much without spoiling the game, so we'll go to my scores and then my after analysis. As I said before, we're breaking this down into 5 categories, each one with a score out of 10 and then a final percentage of up to 100. So first up, the story. When I first played this, I wasn't sure quite what to expect. A lot of these indie titles, and yes, I played just about all of them, always tend to be the same story, give or take. I can normally figure out the plot right from the get-go, but this time it felt different. As I said, right at the beginning, I thought Michael and Jay were playing a prank on Anna, and I was mistaken. That was my first clue that this was going to be individual from all the others. There's not a whole lot I can go into here while keeping this somewhat spoiler free, but I will say that the story is very intriguing, and it will keep you guessing on what's going on throughout. Story score, 8.2 out of 10. Next, let's look at the graphics. The forest in particular is very beautiful. I genuinely felt like I was there walking through them woods. The shadowing looked really incredible, and the lighting is done very well too. With these working together, as I said earlier, I kept thinking I was seeing things that weren't there. The house itself is filled with candles, which are spread out efficiently enough that you're not wandering around in the dark, unless the game intends you to, which at times happens. There isn't much more I could say about the graphics other than to tell you there was a lot of time put into this. It's beautiful, so I give the graphics an 8.7 out of 10. Now, the soundtrack. Throughout the title, it's very low key, just enough to keep the atmosphere without too much distraction, but when it needs to be loud and scary, it really is. As far as the sound effects go in general, they immensely add to the atmosphere and feel of the game. I found myself jumping at the silliest of things because I was kept on edge. This was aided by the sounds of the game. I enjoyed the music a lot, and after a little research, I learned that the creator of the game, Jeff Winner, is actually a musician, so there's no surprise why this had such a decent soundtrack. In fact, the song in the trailer for Horror Story Hallowseed was performed by the creator's own daughter. I'll leave a link to the track below, it's fantastic. Sound score, I'll give this 9 out of 10. Honestly, check it out. Alright, general gameplay. The controls are very basic, and you don't have to dance all over your keyboard just to find the right key. It uses a couple of simple buttons, which is all that's needed. It's not an action game or a shooter, so there's no need to over-exaggerate the controls, which it doesn't do. I'm pretty sure you can change the mouse sensitivity, but with the basic controls it gives you, I found no need to do so. It's fine as it is. The sprint feature is timed pretty well and feels authentic. The items you need to interact with are highlighted when you get close to them, and the simple click of your mouse is all that's needed. Games such as Layers of Fear have you grab a door handle or a drawer handle and physically move your mouse just to open them, which I get adds a little to the atmosphere and fear factor, but it's not always necessary, and after you do this a few times, it just becomes boring. I'm glad that this wasn't in the game. There are a couple of times when you may need to move an obstruction of some sorts, blocking a doorway for example, but the way it's done adds to the realism I think. It's not overdone. The only thing I had a bit of an issue with was the camera would sometimes jerk. Now at times, particularly during jump scare moments, the view would need to look directly behind you, spinning you on a 180, and if I was moving my mouse at the time, it wouldn't catch exactly what I needed to see. But that, in fairness, may have been something I was doing by mistake. So the general gameplay score, 8.1 out of 10. Now let's move on to the final score, replayability value. I kept getting the feeling throughout the game that I may have missed something, so I would definitely want to go back and do this again. Granted, I wouldn't be as on edge during the second playthrough, but you're going to find that with any game I suppose. When I played the early access version way back when, there didn't seem to be as much exploration as there was in the final version, so that intrigued me a lot. The jump scares, at times, without spoiling, seemingly can be randomised, and that kept me nervous throughout, which is exactly what a horror game should be about. I wish I could go into more detail about that, but I couldn't without revealing spoilers. So yes, I'd recommend a second playthrough. There could be things you may have missed, and as I said before, there may be more than one way to complete this game, but that's just my opinion, as is the entire of this video. With that, my replayability value score, I'll give this a 7.7 out of 10. So now, my final thoughts on the game. A little bit of research indicates that the game will take you around 2 to 3 hours to complete. Took me a lot longer because I kept pausing to make notes, but it seems most people completed it within that time frame. As I said before, I play a lot of these types of games, but this one is definitely up there. If you consider that this was created by just one man, it's incredible. I like the soundtrack, the gameplay, the scares, and the graphics were beautiful. I tallied up all the scores before, and with a little help from a calculator, I'm giving us a final total score of 84.6%. I honestly think that particularly if horror games are your thing, Horror Story Hallowseed is something you need to experience. You can find this on the Steam store page, to which I'll leave the link below. I want to thank you guys for watching. This was my first official game review. I haven't quite decided on my next one, but be sure to stick around to see what it is. My aim here is to bring games that aren't AAA titles into light, because the amount of work that goes into these, considering that they're normally just done by either 1 or 2 people, absolutely fascinates me. If you enjoyed what you watched, be sure to like and subscribe, and follow me on my social medias, which you will find linked below. This has been Philby Gaming. Thank you guys once more, and I'll see you in the next review.